10 books that screwed up the world.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the church is buying them, and we
Oh,
can buy them from the church, and they get, you know, a Lifeway discount, whatever that is. So the study starts. The next sessions, I think, are the 3rd of April, and that's when that'll start. So once it's out, I'll let you know when they've got the books in, and that way you don't have to go out and buy them. So they were happy to. By the way, everybody has SES as their Amazon Smile, right? So we can get. You guys know about Amazon Smile? If you sign up, you actually don't have to sign up. You're already able to do it with Amazon. I'll get you a link if you want, but any nonprofit, virtually any nonprofit, they give a portion, real small amounts, but a portion of what you spend in Amazon gets into an account, and every quarter or so they take everybody that has you and they give you a check. So, okay. I went into Geisler's Systematic Theologies, those thick books, if you've ever seen them. Excellent books. I highly recommend them. It should be a staple on anybody's shelf. In fact, I think one of you mentioned it. Whenever David Limbaugh is on television, he has in his home study Geisler's 4-volume Systematic Theology on his bookshelf, and he makes sure that's just what is on over-the-shoulder shot. So whenever he's on any news program about whatever topic, doesn't matter, you get Norman Geisler right there. So it's kind of cool, and it really is a good set of books. They've been condensed to a single, even thicker and smaller font version of the same thing. I don't think they got rid of any of the info. It's just, you know, a lot smaller font. It's really good because the way he goes through it, like for example, we're doing God's attributes. Here's the attribute. Here's what it is. Here's what it isn't. All the philosophical arguments for it. But then he goes through the church fathers. Why, you know, here's a quote from Ignatius. Here's a quote from Polycarp. So he goes through the church fathers, and then the medieval church fathers, and then the Reformation, and post-Reformation. And so he's showing that this doctrine that we're talking about is not radical or fringe or, you know, anything to be worried about. Christians have believed this from day one, is basically what he's trying to show. And so it's nice because you can kind of sit back and be like, all right, this is something that I'm participating with Christians throughout the centuries, the millennia. So tonight what I did, the reason I bring it up, is as much as I could type, I didn't get them all done. I put several of the quotes in there. So we're going to read some longer quotes from really, really old guys tonight. And that's kind of cool. I feel connected with the past. When people long ago are saying something virtually the same way we would say it today in theology, it feels good. It's like, okay, we're part of the same team and we're not doing anything new and crazy. So, speaking of new and crazy, I tried posting it, and it wouldn't let me for some reason, probably at Facebook. I wonder about them, that they actually do screen certain things. I initially saw it on Facebook, so I don't know, but I tried pasting, and they said, oh, we're having technical problems, try again later. I tried all day, and I'm like, yeah, technical problems, it's a simple post. But
Facebook's out. It was on the news.
There are alternatives. The problem is no one's on it, and so the very thing we're trying to do is get out to a lot of people. I don't know what the solution is. I don't want to have any kind of government regulation or anything like that, but yeah. But what I was going to say is Heritage Foundation, everybody familiar with them? They're the largest, most successful conservative think tank in the world, I guess, but in the country. And very respected. They have scholars in every field, at economics, culture, whatever. This one was a panel. Brian Anderson is, we've had him at our conference before. He's real big on being on the front lines of the gay marriage debate, or anything having to do with gender and LGBTQ plus whatever the other acronym is. He's in the front lines of that. He's a Christian. He's solid. They had four. He introduced it, but the four panelists were radical left-wing feminists. One used to be a woman who is a biological male, got the gender reassignment surgery, and then reversed it again because he realized this is crazy. So you have four panelists who, they're up there, they say, we don't agree on anything with heritage, and back and forth. They're like, life issues, gender roles, faith. They disagree. They're radical left-wingers. These are not anywhere near even the middle. And they are saying we are really concerned about the transgender movement. it is, think about it. If gender is fluid, then what's feminism? They lose all of their steam. They have no case, and they know it. And they what's been happening is they have like one woman, she was talking that she gave her story and really great presentations. She said, I got fired from it wasn't her 40-hour-a-week job, but she was a consultant, part of this group. They fired her simply because she wanted to say, no, being a lesbian, which she is I'm a woman that is attracted to other women, not a a fluid she said that radical idea, they got her kicked off of this committee. And the four of them said the irony here is, and this is maybe their step toward God, maybe. They said that we have been ignored or demonized by the liberal media. They said the mainstream media won't touch us. But yet what we consider right-wing or conservative media outlets are inviting us in and letting us say our story, and they give what they think is a balanced approach to our story. They're not unfair or biased. It's amazing. I mean, so they each give a 20-minute presentation. Ryan Anderson does a 20-minute, and then they have a Q&A. So as soon as I can post it, I will. If not, I don't know what we'll do. I guess I can just email it or something. But you got to see it. It's an hour and 10 minutes, and it is golden because it shows you there's hope, number one, that the left will start to feed on itself and implode because it's not tenable. I mean, their beliefs don't match reality in any area, and so they do start to cannibalize their own people if they disagree on one small thing that isn't part of their wheelhouse. So that's good news. But the other good news is that there's hope for people to take a journey. Once they open their eyes, if something causes them to open their eyes, it could be a journey to God. And you've seen stories like that. People who have radical conversion stories, a lot of them are along those lines. They get disillusioned with what they thought was accepting left.
Is it on the Heritage site by any chance?
Oh yeah. If you go to Heritage, you can select. They have, I think, content. I think it's called, and they've got it categorized: culture, and then you'll see, I think, gender. It's easy to get to. It's like the fourth one down. It happened in January. They have a ton of things on there. Really, they're doing great work. I love what they're doing.
Yeah, who'd have thought they'd ever attack Nancy Pelosi for being too conservative?
This LGBT, the one thing I'll say that I took away from this is these three women and one man, they said the LGB movement is one thing. They said the T is completely different. And they went through all the reasons why. And so there's a fracture now that is showing, no, you can't, it's not just whatever you want. Now, they're not consistent with reality either, obviously. But them acknowledging that there is something called objective reality, and transgenderism violates that, is a good first step. It's like the 12 steps of Christianity being true. The first one is truth about reality is knowable, and the opposite of true is false. They're rare. Okay, that's where they're starting. Now someone can take them along, and you're right. Now, why is there such thing as truth? We can start talking about the existence of God, and that's a big deal for people. So, I was going to say something, but I can't remember what it was. So anyway, it's worth the watch, and that'd be fun to talk about. And we will talk about one of the books in the series that we're doing, 10 books that screwed up the world, is The Feminine Mystique. And another one is it's called The Mating Habits of this American Sexual Male or something like that. Remember that book that came out in the...
This thing's disgusting.
It is horrible, and we'll go into it later, but he claims to have done a scientific study, but what he did was he interviewed and studied former, ex-cons, number one, and I think it was that people that he found like at rest stops that would meet up and try and hook up. And it's like, this is not a cross-section of American population. Like your sample, anybody would, so the statistician said that's not even a good sample. So it doesn't extrapolate to the greater population. So that's why it's debunked. But the stuff he does in there, it's messed up. So we're going to be doing both those books in there. And so it touches on this LGBTQ phenomenon, that this LGBTQ we're experiencing now is the great-great-grandchild of those ideas that came down from those books. And so, again, 10 books that screwed up the world. Start off with, I thought I would just go ahead and list them all, I think it goes in one spot, and separate them, the metaphysical attributes and what we mean by that versus the non-moral characteristics, the moral characteristics. And then usually people, when they do this, they also separate out of all those Trinity, because it's sort of a separate category, because no way to know the Trinity outside of God's special revelation. So, last week I did it. I can do it again this week. I sent, did you guys post it, the PDF? I sent it to Joe. I thought he said he was going to post it.
No, I attached it to the
You did? Okay,
recording.
good. Was it you I sent it to or Joe? Was it you? Because I'll do it
No,
again
I
this
think
week.
you sent it, I don't know.
I'll send you the PDF again so you don't have to worry about writing
Yeah.
too frantically. So, but the important thing is metaphysical attributes are things that are true of God no matter what. If He never created the universe, people, anything. Non-moral are things that, because of creation, He's sovereign, transcendent, immanent, and ineffable. And then, but they're not moral. It's not like He's pronouncing judgment, or it's just He's transcendent. He's sovereign. He is over. So if Adam and Eve, I guess the way to separate that, if Adam and Eve had never sinned, those would still be true. Now, his moral attributes, he would still be holy and righteous, but he wouldn't need to be just if there's nothing to judge, if the angels and humans never had fallen, right? So these are, the moral attributes are more about his relationship to, the relationship of the creation to him is actually the way to say it, because God doesn't change in his relationship, right? Because he doesn't change. But that's how you separate those out. And then other moral activities, which is not an attribute. So when God shows mercy or wrath, that's not actually an attribute of God. So the wrath of God, that's just something he's doing in creation. So God can act in any way that he chooses that doesn't violate his nature. And that's the change that we're talking about when we say God's, God's justice and God's mercy. Well, those are things that God does, how he relates to a fallen world, but there's no change happening in God. See the difference between an attribute and why that's important. So there's not a wrath part of God and a mercy part of God. These are just things that he does, activities that happen in creation. So that help a little bit, like categorize. We've been talking, and we're going to continue talking about the metaphysical, because over here, this is when you get cults, when they mess up this. This over here is when you get bad Christian practice like legalism or licentiousness or something, just a born-again Christian, but they're misguided. That's going to be over here usually. So that's why we focus over here, because if you get this part wrong, it doesn't matter how well you're living your life, you're not getting to heaven, because that's God. That is when it says, to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. It doesn't mean like a mantra or an incantation, just say the word Jesus and you're saved. It means accept Jesus for who he is, like in reality, not who you want him to be. So Mormons believe in Jesus, Muslims believe in Jesus, but not Jesus. The word is not the important thing, it's who he is. You guys see that other post on Facebook about the Muslim that came to Christ from the Quran? It was interesting. I'll have to look into it deeper, but the reason he became a Christian, he wanted to find out who this Jesus is. So he went to the Quran and he realized that Jesus is mentioned something like 4 or 5 times more than Muhammad. The name Jesus is more in the Quran than Muhammad. And then he started kind of doing this logic like, well, God is he started doing some classical attributes. Well, then can't be this, can't be that. And he reasoned his way to this Jesus must be God's son. And then he ended up, I don't know how he got a Bible or whatever, but he accepted Christ, all because he was just digging into it. Which gets back into why I love apologetics. If someone has an open mind and they're not going to give up the pursuit, God's not going to tell that person, tough, you're not elect, or anything like that. They will find them. says, "You will find me if you seek me with all your heart," right? And all sorts of verses that say his existence and his relationship to them is obvious if you're looking through creation, through his activities, whatever. So that was really encouraging. So.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
The guy committing murder thing, been thinking about it, and so, now obviously by definition, he can't.
Right.
By definition. But is that where, when he wipes out humanity for some reason, is that where it goes under wrath? Or we call it, that's God's wrath. It's not.
Right. It's his activity in creation, but nothing changed in his nature. Like God didn't change at the fall. Our relationship to him changed at the fall. But yeah, that's right. It would be wrath. You could even say, because of his righteousness, he shows wrath. He does this action in creation because of that moral attribute. But he's not righteous if there's no creation. He's just God. The Father's not telling the Son, "I'm righteous." And the Son's like, "Oh, yes, you are." You know, they're all God, right? So the righteousness applies to each. So that's kind of how I think about it. What would be true if the three of them are just sitting around? And that's these over there. This is what is true of God. That's helpful. Just for me, it has been to kind of parse that out. Not that these don't matter, obviously, because that's all we really care about. Because we're the creatures. We're the ones who have to relate to this God. And these are not. These are the. These attributes are where we have to use analogical language. But over here, wrath and mercy actually is univocal. God's action. So we can show wrath, and it's the same thing that we mean when God shows wrath. Because it's an action. It's not talking about something in his infinite being that we couldn't possibly understand because we're finite. So that's an interesting point too, that the whole can't really know, we can only know from his effect and reason from effect to cause, and we can't know him directly because of his infinity. We use analogical language to understand all those attributes, but not so with wrath and mercy. I just thought about that. That's actually really cool. Okay, starting out with immateriality. We touched on this. Did we do it actually last week? I don't remember. I'm doing the new format, so if we did, hopefully you'll get more out of it this time. I'm going to start with just the philosophical argument for it. God, who is pure act, has no potentiality. Matter, physical things, has potential to change and does change. So matter can go from solid to liquid, that's a change. It can be located here or here. It can be malleable. The matter, there's all sorts of ways you can show that matter can change. Therefore, God being pure act, he cannot be. It's impossible for him to be material. This is getting back to why we start with actuality and simplicity. Those are the two attributes that we start with, and you see all these other ones just follow. So Mormonism, God had a body? Nope, could not have had a body because he's pure act. There's no way that God had a body, ever, because he can't change, which is immutability. We'll talk about that, I think, next week. Is the doctrine of God not changing, not being able to be changed, again, because of his pure act. And then, of course, scripture verses. I'm going to have a couple more, I think, on the next slide. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. And, of course, tons of other verses, obviously. If in the beginning God created, so everything that came after couldn't have been present before, because that was the beginning. And since the material universe is what he created, he can't be material. So that's implied in a lot of other passages that talk about God being the author and the cause of all things material. So theologically, what we mean is that God is immaterial or pure spirit, like the passage just said. Matter, it can be defined either philosophically or scientifically. So philosophers, matter is that which has extension in space. So dimensionality, height, width, depth. That's what philosophers mean. Scientifically, you could even say physical energy. And I was talking to one of our professors. Does that include string? With string theory, if you've heard people talking about that in the past decade or so, the one theory of what's at the foundation of all of reality, these vibrating energy strings. And some theoretical physicists who don't think very clearly, I don't think as philosophers, say that that's in the beginning there were strings, and our whole universe is just one string that vibrated and created. That's the multiverse theory. If certain models of the multiverse are true, then these strings do exist. Those are strings of energy, not matter. But the point is, they're still physical, even though they're energy. So they're part of the physical. Just logically, again, you can't have anything that's physical be the explanation of all things that are physical, because it itself is in that set of physical, finite things. And there are other good arguments against that too. We're not going to go into Big Bang cosmology now. Immaterial then is what has no extension, no time, mass, physical energy, or physical force. Remember when we talked about the Big Bang or the cosmological argument? Science has demonstrated that all matter, time itself came into existence, mass, physical energy, the laws of physics, everything came into existence at the point of the singularity, they'll call it. They don't like calling it creation. But at the singularity, all those things came into being. So if there was no mass prior to the singularity, the cause of it couldn't be physical, couldn't be in time, it has to be eternal then. Can't have, it's not energy, it's not, all the things that we measure in our universe, the cause of it can't be any of those things because it would have to pre-exist before it caused itself. So you can see the logic there. So the cosmological argument is a powerful argument, not only for God's existence, but you have several of his attributes right away. So, any questions on that? I'm going to do some block quotes here. You may not have heard of all these people. Tatian is the earliest one that I found, 2nd century. To give you an idea, maybe even into the year 100, the Apostle John lived. Somewhere between 90 and a little bit after the turn of the century is when the best guess. He's the only apostle who died of natural causes. History tells us. The Bible doesn't say, except for James, brother of John. He's the only one that we know for sure died in the book of Acts. Other than that, it's all other historical sources. So I just want to say that because look how close this is to the apostolic age. So right away, the first group of people, the first generation that's trying to figure this stuff out as not inspired individuals, so they're reading the inspired inerrant text, and they're trying to put together, what does this mean to be a Christian versus a Jew versus a polytheist and so forth. These are those guys. The 2nd century is the first century of people having to figure all that out. Do you have a question?
That's just an observation. And I'm looking at this sentence, it was sometime between 120 and 180 AD, and this thought that he has right here, and all these people now that somehow think that these people long ago were ignorant and stupid, when they're coming up with stuff and having thoughts like this.
I'd like to see Joy Bearhart try to talk to this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah, exactly. There's a very much chronological snobbery on our part that everyone who went before us was
The
stupid.
best I can tell, we're getting dumber.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
In many ways, yes.
I mean,
We certainly aren't very well read. We're not dealing in these kinds of ideas. Now, to be fair to the common people of that time, they may have been dumber than common people of today. Obviously, someone who wrote at that level was because they had worked their way up, the academic food chain. So we're hearing from the best of that time period. That's why it's preserved through history. But even that, compared to our best today, I would say, look, he'd go toe-to-toe with any of the scholars today and give them a run for their money. No question. I didn't put it in here, but this is kind of cool. He goes on to argue that from creation. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to say, what was the biggest thing in the Roman Greco culture, religiously? Polytheism. They were worshiping Zeus and Thor, and actually not Thor, but all the Greek and Roman gods. So they had a god for everything in creation. God of the sun, God of the moon, all that. So his take on Romans 1 was kind of cool. After this passage here, he says, creation is what serves to show you God. So it has a job to do. It shows you God. So when you go and worship creation, you're worshiping your servant. It was kind of cool. Like, its job is to do something for you. Don't turn around then and go, oh, Zeus, or oh, Luna, or whatever. It's supposed to be doing something for you, not to be the focus of worship. I thought that is really kind of a cool argument against polytheism that he had to fight that day. So that was kind of neat. And it's the opposite. See, we have the opposite end of worshiping the elements of creation is saying that creation is no good for anything. General revelation can't give you knowledge of God. It's only the Bible. So some Christians make the opposite mistake of diminishing what we can know about God and ourselves and the nature of reality simply from observation. The interesting thing he goes through, because there wasn't a Bible in the sense of an agreed upon 66 books, although if you remember that portion of last class, they knew which ones were authoritative and written by the apostles. It wasn't like they sat around until the Council of Nicaea. That's a false narrative. But they didn't have what we have, where they're, hey, Luke 4, they turn to it, and yet he, what was the point I was making there? Oh, so he's saying creation is enough for you to know these things. Number one, not to worship it. Number two, there is a God that has all these attributes, and it lines up with the Bible. Isn't this great? We have all this reason to believe that Christianity is true. Nowadays, it's, well, don't trust creation because, secular science or whatever the spin is. Yet you're taking away that one revelation. And the second thing that he said, the third thing that he said was, it's your senses, sounding very Thomistic. He says, through your senses, sensible reality is what makes you know that there's a God that has certain attributes. He was doing what we call Thomistic epistemology over 1,000 years before Aquinas was born, because I could tell he was reading Plato and Aristotle. He actually quotes Plato earlier in the same quote. So isn't it kind of cool? You look at, like you're saying, not just these guys, but Plato and Aristotle were hundreds of years before this. They were not dumb. These guys are, whoa, I understand what you're saying, and you're using same kind of reasoning we use today. You're clearly intelligent, well thought out position.
You said even the commoners, though, but I bet even the commoners would have said, like, wait, you're saying that we evolved from plants?
Probably, yeah.
They'd have been like, no, yeah, the commoners would have been like, well,
yeah, and especially in Greece and Rome, and cultures influenced by the two of them, they, I think that they had a common understanding of at least Plato. Aristotle seems to have gotten lost until, interestingly, God preserved Aristotle's teaching through the Muslims. Just from a fact of kind of an accident of history, the works kind of worked their way into the Arab-speaking world, translated into Arabic, and preserved in Muslim culture until, I can't remember, right around the turn of the millennium. They were translated back into Latin, and that's what Aquinas started reading. And all the people before him, they're like, whoa, this guy's got it. Who is this Aristotle? I've heard, we know about him, but we haven't studied him before. And they started realizing that this guy got it right. And so it was really kind of cool that God uses even really dark things like Islam and all the things that they did against the Christian church, and God used that. It's kind of cool. Same reason the Visigoths were used to preserve and to perpetuate the transmission of text, because what did they do? The monks blocked themselves off because of that whole Visigoths, and then the legalization of Christianity and all that created monasteries. And what they do, they isolated themselves, which was kind of a loser thing to do, but they made use of their time. They actually transmitted, and we have a lot of the manuscripts we have now is because monks were doing work. So even things that we would look at and say, that wasn't the greatest decision to do, God redeemed it. That's, I guess, the message there. Origen, just a little bit later, he crosses over to the 3rd century though. God therefore is not to be thought of as being either a body or as existing in a body, but as an uncompounded intellectual nature, admitting within himself no addition of any kind, so that he cannot be believed to have within him a greater and a less, but is such that he is in all parts. I know that some will attempt to say that even according to the declarations of our own Scripture, God is a body, and then he goes into all the things that we've already covered. the passages that say the hands of the Lord, the eyes of the Lord. He's dealing with that in the first and second and third centuries. The same problems that some people are even bringing up today. God has a body part. God has emotions. God can change his mind. Look at the scripture says so. He was dealing with it already. And the interesting thing is, look at the year here, our own scriptures. So they're already talking about it that way. So this idea that the scriptures or the Bible came in the 300s at the Council of Nicaea, no, this guy is already talking about it. The Gospel of Matthew was called the Gospel of Matthew around the year 180, and it was quoted right away. I mean, in the first part of the second century, the books of the Bible were already being quoted in sermons and letters back and forth with each other. So the Bible has always been the Bible. The Council of Nicaea just said, let's just be real clear about this, because you got all these cultic, aberrant religions that are claiming they got the Gospel of Judas and the Gospel of Mary and all this. We just got to define what we mean so that the common people aren't confused. That's all that was. It wasn't inventing it. I just want to do that as an aside. Two things I thought were really cool about this. Uncompounded. What's he talking about there? Divine simplicity. Yep. So they're already talking like that, not using the word simplicity yet, but this goes all the way back to right at the beginning, no addition of any kind. So admitting within himself no addition of any kind is he's pure act. There's no way to add or change. There's no potential in God. So right in this one quote, you've got pure actuality and simplicity. So this is really cool. We're talking about stuff that goes all the way back. Yeah.
What language is origin?
Oh boy, origin probably Greek, I would think. But I don't know for sure, because Greek and Latin, as you know, right away it started kind of split East and West Empire, and it was by language. I don't know where he was.
He did a lot of the Trinity, did he?
Yeah, there's a lot of good quotes in there about the Trinity. Now, some of these guys, Origen, Irenaeus, they had some weird beliefs too. I mean, as they were wrestling through, it's not like these guys are infallible. You read some of the things, you're like, what are you talking about, man? That's crazy. But they're working it out, is the point. They're not. That's why I think it's even better to see that they made error. Shows that they were wrestling with it, and one person gets one thing wrong, this guy didn't get it wrong, and they debate each other, and it acts as a corrective, which is why I think theological debating is good. It's good for all of us to, sharpen each other. So.
Was Origen the one that took literally the passages where Jesus says, if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out?
I'm not sure if that was
He
Origen.
castrated himself.
Yeah.
That was Origen?
To make a new, and then but like you were saying, he admitted later that was not right, and he corrected himself. He said, that's not. He said and it's not in the parts. The problem is the mind, not the body part.
They were radical, weren't they?
Yeah.
Things that they would do to put out what they thought was their faith in that case.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, this guy, Augustine, is considered to be the greatest writer up and through Aquinas. So it really is. You got Augustine and Aquinas and a bunch of blips in between. It's almost that because of how much they wrote and how sharp these two guys were. And they disagreed. Aquinas would be more of a free will, and Augustine would be more towards predestination. So they didn't agree on everything, but Aquinas really respected Augustine. They're separated by about 1,000 years too. Augustine also favored Plato and Aquinas as an Aristotelian, so that's the other split. And if you care what that means, you can ask me. But that's just Plato and Aristotle are sort of you can go that way or you can go that way about what reality is. And one's Plato, one's Aristotle, and pretty much all Western philosophy is one or the other. That's how clear each of these people were, what's the word? Complete. So if Plato said, "Here's what reality is," and he fleshed it out, so everything was answered. And Aristotle said, "No, that's not how it is. It's this way," and he fleshed it out, so pretty much everything was answered. That's how big of a mark the two guys made. You have to respect it, even if I don't think Aristotle might be in heaven because he actually did believe in a God that had the attributes, and he never saw, as far as we know, anything from the Jewish scriptures. He didn't obviously accept Christ because Christ wasn't born yet. So some people have wondered, I wonder if he is in heaven. Like, did God find, not find a way? Did God come to him knowing that he would respond because he had gotten so far in his own thinking? So maybe that'd be kind of cool. Go up to Aristotle and be like, dude, how was it? How'd you wear those tunics, man? The Platonic philosophers then well understood that no body could be God, and therefore, in order to find him, they rose beyond all material things. Plato said that this world is a shadow. The real is something that's in this, what he called the Platonic realm or Platonic heaven. So there was this thing called a tree form that was the perfect tree. Every other tree is just a shadow of that tree. They have tree-ness, he called it, and humanness, and so that's how he talked. But the point he's making here is, at least Plato understood that something that is pure, the ultimate, if you're talking about the ultimate, it can't be in this physical world because it's finite. There's no way it could be what we're talking about when we're talking about the ultimate. So he's kind of giving him a kudos that, hey, at least you got that, dude. You looked around you, you looked at the Romans 1, and you're saying to yourself, I'm looking at creation, there's got to be something more. But what is that more? He came up with some crazy idea of this Platonic heaven. I think it's crazy. It's really weird when you hear it, in my opinion. But he was doing a really good job trying. Just went the wrong direction. And then Aquinas. It is therefore impossible that in God there should be any potentiality, but every body is in potentiality. Not everybody, but every physical body is in potentiality, because the continuous, as such, is divisible to infinity. It is therefore impossible that God should be a body. So you ever hear the thing, what if you cut a pie in half, and then take that half and cut it in half, and physical things theoretically could be all the way to infinity, and you're still going to have matter. You're still going to have something physical. So what he's saying is physical things can't be divided enough times. This is actually a passage where he's arguing also for divine simplicity. That's why God can't have parts. Physical things can be divided into parts, amongst other things, but physical things, not God. He has to be simple and immutable, and in this case, immaterial. Okay, now we get in several, actually not too many centuries later. We deny that God is such an extended, long, broad, thick, high, low being. So is that extended in space? Does have dimensionality, which is immateriality. Jacob Arminius, I didn't get Calvin's in here, but he's got one too. We separate corporeal essence from God according to the mode of removal, and at the same time, all things which belong to a corporeal essence as such, whether to be simple, or compound, such as magnitude, figure, place, or arts, whether sensible or imaginable. In other words, if corporeal things has as its essence to be located in space. God can't be located in space. That's why he's not corporeal, not physical. The only reason I didn't put John Calvin's quote in here because it's so long that he was weaving throughout this long paragraph. It was like a page, it would have been 3 or 4 slides. This concept that is immateriality, but I didn't want to put that whole thing up there. But I did want to say, anytime you can get what are now called Catholic Church Fathers, you get the Reformers with Jacob Arminius and their followers all saying the same thing about God, that's pretty good proof that this is what it means to be a Christian, to believe this. When every form of Christianity through history has all agreed about God is immaterial, God is pure act, God is simple, God is all these things, we should feel comfortable that we're not venturing out on some fringe belief system. So, and since Baptist, in my opinion, is the most natural expression of biblical Christianity, I really believe that, we're right in line with all this stuff. Because that's all these guys are doing, saying, if this is true, then that, and they're wrestling with it. So, any questions on immateriality? Omnipotence. So, the ability to do anything. Can God do? Well, I won't ask that, because I actually have a sign on there. God is pure act with no potentiality. What has no potentiality has no but not to have all power is a limit. Therefore, hence, God is unlimited in his power. Does that make sense? The logic flow there. And of course, the scriptural reference, for nothing will be impossible with God, and on again. Talking about God's power, there are so many passages. Read the Psalms, read Job. Man, God's answer to Job is basically like, excuse me, hello, were you there? Did you do these things? And he just goes on and on about his omnipotence and omniscience as well. Omni, of course, all impotent, power, all power, that's from the root of the word. God's power is perfect, which means it's identical with his essence. To use philosophical terms, when we say God is simple, we mean in every way we can look at it. Essence, existence, means that God has no essence and existence that can be split. He's pure essence and existence. His essence is to exist, is how it's said often. So if that's true, then anything that's true about him is identical with his essence. Every attribute, we're going to talk about metaphysical attribute, is identical to who he is, what he is. God's power is infinite. It's not like really, again, not Superman in the sky. God's power is absolutely free, meaning he's not restricted by anything but his own nature. He doesn't have the power to lie, in other words. God is almighty, able to do all things. God can do whatever is possible, and God can do what is not impossible, which is the same linguistically as the prior sentence, but just to really drive it home. But it seems like there are some things God can't do. God can't lie, like we said. We've all said in the class before, we've talked about how God can't not love you. It's impossible for God to stop loving you. So there are restrictions in God. So he can't, what we mean by God can't lie, it's not because he's got a set of rules that he's obligated to follow, because that would mean that set of rules is above God. That would mean that set of rules is God, not God. God has to be the ultimate. There has to be an ultimate. This is what I like about Aquinas too. Instead of saying, here's what we believe as Christians, and I'm going to hold on to that and just defend it whenever somebody starts attacking an attribute. He said, what has to be true? And then he would say, reason up and say, there has to be a pure act being, a pure actual with no potential. Well, that's just what everyone means when they say the word God. And then he would reason up and he would say that being has to be simple. And that's just what people mean when they say the word God. He would finish that sentence. A lot of his articles would end with, and this by all men mean God. So what he's saying is, this has to be the case, and oh wow, that's God. See how it's a different approach? It means you can't get out of it. If you got a God that you have all these attributes that you're just kind of defending willy-nilly, you're having all these skirmishes and fighting and with the skeptic, bring it back to reality and say, okay, given what we know about reality, reason up. You can call this thing Steve if you want, but you're going to be describing what all other people call God. So this thing has to exist. It can't not be the case. That's a lot more powerful than our God's better than your God, and that kind of approach, which is unfortunately a lot of times the tone that gets struck when we're talking about comparative religions or religion versus atheism in our culture. It's a lot more you're a lot more confident because it's natural. It doesn't feel forced. Does that make sense? That's a little different way of looking at it, but when I had that aha moment in my training, it just lit up my world. Okay, God can't make square circles. Why? Because he's not a good drawer. Why is it that God cannot make a square circle? Because if he's omnipotent, he can do anything.
Question.
What?
It's an improper question.
Well, it's the question is
Self-contradictory.
right. Because a square, well, one is the negation of the other. To be a square is to not be a circle, which violates a principle of logic. I'm not talking about Aristotelian logic, but God, remember we talked back with the 12 reasons why Christianity is true. The things that we call the laws of logic are just expressions of God's pure being. So to exist is not to not exist. That's how we get, you either exist or you don't. A thing either has existence or it doesn't. Well, that's just the law of excluded middle. It either is A or not A. It can't be anywhere in between. And then of course existence is existence. It's not something other than existence. So you get the law of identity. A is A. So we went through all those. That's where you start when you're trying to reason up to what is true about the world. Well, since that flows from God's nature, that's just an expression of reality, God being reality and us having reality. A square and a circle, that would be a violation of God's nature. That's why he can't draw a square circle. And the same thing, he can't lie. We already talked about that. It violates who he is. It's not like, I wish I could, but I can't. No, it's impossible. And this was where it gets into the main reason why I'm not a Calvinist. To force a free act is a logical contradiction. So either a person isn't free, or so you get into all that like determinism or freedom, but it's just as illogical for God to hold someone accountable for a non-free act. If they had no choice in the matter, then by definition they're not culpable. But God holds us culpable. So the same line of reasoning, there's no middle ground there. So that's why I say whatever God's sovereignty means, it doesn't mean the way Calvinists explain it, where there's the irresistible aspect of God's grace, it's the divine, it's Christian determinism. Now there are types of Calvinism that are a lot softer than that, and that's kind of where I'm comfortable with. But that's the main reason why I don't believe in predestination the way it's explained today. And Preacher Mike doesn't either. This is not a church, he's said this, where you'll be happy, you'll be comfortable as a hardcore Calvinist, because he's just not going to ever preach determinism. Doesn't mean not preaching sovereignty. That's where you get into truth, sovereignty. So he cannot force freedom because of the same thing. He doesn't have the power to contradict himself. God does not have to do all that he can do. This is an important one. So just because he can do, remember, he has potentialities in his actions, not in his being. He's pure act. He can't change at all. But he can do a number of different things. He could split the Red Sea or not split the Red Sea. He could choose Abraham or choose Ishmael. He could, or Isaac or Ishmael. He could a lot of things that God can do that don't violate his nature. But he's not obligated to do any of them. So his omnipotence doesn't mean he's required to do anything. God is free to not use his omnipotence. That's kind of saying the same thing. That is, God is free to limit the use of his power, but he's not free to limit the extent of his power. So he can't make himself less able to split the Red Sea. But his freedom means that he could choose to or not to. Unless he had promised. So God made a promise to us, I will never leave you nor forsake you. No one will be able to pluck you out of my hands. Those are promises. He can't fail to do that because of what? God can't speak, communicate anything false. It would be going against his very nature. So prophecy, we can hold on to that. That's another reason, getting back into, this is great, this is celebrating Baptist Day. The idea of dispensationalism versus covenantal, if you've ever heard that, Baptists were dispensationalists, which there's a whole lot of things I think that are wrapped up in there. But the thing that really makes me say that, yeah, I sign on to that and not that, is this idea that God made certain promises to the nation of Israel, to Abraham, that were non-conditional. Other promises he made that, well, if you behave, then I'll protect you and I'll give you crops and all that. Well, they didn't behave, so he had no, he had the if-then in there. But there are other promises that just, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bless the world. I'm going to make you a mighty nation. I'm going to bless everybody. And anyone that blesses you, I'll bless. And anyone that curses you, watch out. I'm going to curse them. There is no conditional in there. That's why America better just keep being nice to Israel. That's why Hitler was a special kind of evil. And that's why he did what he did, actually. It was Satan going after the Abrahamic covenant. So
There's a huge new anti-Semitism.
Oh, in Capitol Hill, you see that Muslim
all over the world.
representative. I mean, the things that she's saying is like that's straight out of the Third Reich.
Yeah.
And people are just like, well, okay. They won't even condemn it. It's crazy. And the other thing that's crazy to me is the majority of ethnic Jews our Democratic liberals. Like, you guys are signing your own death sentence.
Yeah.
I don't get it. But getting back to the dispensationalism, so God is not free to renege on a promise. That's why prophecy is so solid. We know what's going to happen. That's why promises are so solid. It's impossible for God not to have these things be brought about. And of course, his foreknowledge and all those things factor in. He has perfect knowledge of all events, past, present, future, so he can make accurate predictions. So problem number one, you've heard people say, can God make a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? If he's all powerful, he can make the biggest rock ever. And if he's all powerful, he can lift anything. But wait a second, if he's all powerful, why can't he make an unliftable rock? And then so they try to pit his attributes against him themselves. An all-powerful God cannot do what is impossible. We've already said that, like lie or violate any of the laws of thought, the 3 laws of thought, because they flow from his being, not because they were just arbitrarily written and he's good at obeying the rules. These flow from who he is. It is impossible for God to make a stone too heavy for him to lift. What God can make, he can move. What God can create, he can destroy. He cannot make another infinite being, because that being wouldn't be infinite then, right? Because he's infinite in order to make it. Hence, God can do anything that is not impossible or violates who he is. So the answer to that question, you could just say, if someone says, can God make a rock so big he can't move? No. You're admitting that God's not all powerful. No, I'm not. It's just kind of a dumb question, but no, he can't. He also can't tell you a lie. He can't start going through all the things that are really awesome about God's limitations. He can't not love you, even though you're saying this crazy thing right now. He still loves you. Nothing you can do about it. He can't stop it. That's kind of how I handle it, because it's a question that just linguistically makes sense, but when you start thinking about what the meaning of the words are, you realize that no, it doesn't even make sense. Is that satisfying for everyone? Can God? You've all heard that, right? Can God make a rock so big you can't move it? And that's just a real popular comeback. Problem number 2. This is a little bit more existential, something that people deal with. Problem of evil. So, evil, if God is all powerful, why does he not defeat evil? Now, this is the actual argument, but the atheist argument is an all good God would defeat evil, an all powerful God can't defeat evil. There is evil, therefore, a all powerful, all good God doesn't exist. That's the atheist argument. The existence of both are incompatible, and it's positive proof that that God doesn't exist. That's their 1 or 2 positive arguments for God. The rest of them are all negative, meaning here's what I don't like about God. This is an actual argument. But here's the right framing of it. An all good God would, an all powerful can. God is both of those things. That means we can know the evil will be defeated. It doesn't mean, there's nothing about his goodness and his power that means it will have already been defeated. There's nothing obligating God to play out any specific script for history. So that's the mistake that the atheists make, is that the existence of evil at any time in human history. What's the free will defense of why God had to allow the possibility of sin? It's the fact that if God says, love me, love is a choice. And if he says, love me, but I'm not going to give you a tree that grows a fruit that will let you see evil, sin, then you're not free. All you can do is eat fruit that is going to give you eternal life, and I'm saying, choose me, choose me, choose me, then you're not benefiting from love, Adam and Eve, and the offspring that they could have had. So he had to put, again, not because he's obligated morally or anything like that, but because of logic, because he is reason. Love is to choose the good and of the beloved. To obey God is the good. So you can't obey if you don't have a choice. So by definition, he didn't have this rule. I bet animals could have walked up to the tree of knowledge of good and evil and eaten it all day. They're not the types of beings that God made who could love or hate. They just go with their instincts. We can either go with or against our instincts, because we're free. So the free will defense is, I think, the best explanation about why God would allow the possibility of evil, which allows the possibility of good and virtues, which we all celebrate in life. Even atheists celebrate Mother Teresa. So you see how it's kind of you have to have both. If you like the good, you have to allow the possibility of the evil. And therefore, the existence of evil is completely understandable to be free. And the fact that God's going to take care of it, eradicate it one day, is the hope that we have. And we can trust in that because of all its other attributes that we know. He can't fail to do that because he's all good and all powerful, and he promised he would. All these reasons. That's why being a Christian should be the most comfortable human experience, even when it's painful. We're not feeling out of control, like, oh, what's going to happen next? I don't know what the future holds. In details, we don't know, but in broad strokes, we know what the future holds. Before we get to omnipresence, we covered omnipotence good. This morning before the coffee hit, we were all sitting around having kind of like a morning talk as a family, and Jenny recorded some of it, and I looked at it like, I look really bad before coffee strikes. Like I had my coffee in my hand, and I had this totally stoned look on my face. I'm not a morning person, but I get up every day at 5:30 because I have to. But we were talking, and because we were tired, omnipotence, I forget which one of us said it, but it was omnipimpletence. And we were talking, what's that, God in adolescence? Or something, I don't know. Teenagers feel like omnipimpletence, that attribute. Anyway. Omnipresence. God, as simple, has no parts. What has no parts cannot be partly anywhere. Hence, God is not partly anywhere. He is wholly everywhere. I did do omnipresence last week. I wanted to do a little bit more with more depth today with some of these quotes and logical arguments. So this will be some review. There are actually a lot of reasons why we believe God is omnipresent. And remember, it doesn't mean, because we already did his immateriality, that he's physically everywhere, because he's not physical, he's not material. God is pure act with no potentiality. Oh, and we're done with omnipresence. I thought I did that for that. I didn't get the quotes in here because we ran out of time. So because of his immateriality, we don't mean he's physically everywhere, because a physical thing can't be in the same place as another physical thing. Two physical things can't occupy the same space, so he couldn't be everywhere also because he would be bumping into other things. The two things that we mean, at the very least, about God being omnipresent is that he is knowledgeable because of his omniscience of everything that's happening at every point in the universe. That's a very intimate knowledge. He knows about our string, if there is such a thing as energy strings that are, beneath quarks on the subatomic level. If that is the case, he knows it. He knows every little string that is vibrating in the universe, every quark, every subatomic particle and atom. That's how intimate his knowledge is and his omnipresence. Also, he's holding in existence. Remember that I'm going to drop that. So to say God created the universe means that. He created it and he stepped away. So yeah, he made this chalk eraser, or actually not chalk. You guys remember chalk, right? This dry eraser. But he could be that God, whatever created the universe, could have gone out of existence, may not care anymore. Maybe it's a deistic God. So you only get so far proving that there's a beginner to the universe. What classical theism says that this is what we mean by God created the universe. So he not only made the eraser, he's holding it in existence now. And so the present holding in existence needs to be explained. That's the argument we use to show that God exists today, and he's holding everything in being. So omnipresence, prior slide, omnipresence is he is presently holding every molecule and subatomic particle in existence right now. Now talk about intimacy of all of creation. He knows and he's holding in existence. If he were to remove his hand, that's the other part of it. What we mean is if God were to remove his hand of holding us in existence, we're done. We don't exist. It's not like our heart keeps beating for a little while. We cease to exist. That's a profound thought, but it also very worshipful. Like, Lord, when you say you have us in your hand, and I'm glad, because I would just not be. It's like Thanos snapping his finger, but times everything in the. By the way, did you hear that joke? That was it. I'll tell it afterwards. Maybe it's not bad, but I'm being recorded.
I have a question about that. What is the argument for that? Because intuitively, I know that things.
For which the part of.
Well, intuitively, I know that things have to be held in existence. They just can't be created and exist on their own once they've been created. Okay, there's the argument.
Right.
That they would have their existence in themselves if they were.
It's
Okay,
the vertical cosmological.
Yeah.
Exactly. See?
Okay.
So you start thinking through it, it's like, that's what I love about these classical ideas. It's foreign to us only because we don't talk like this, but you start talking out, okay, yeah, like, unless my existence is my essence, so in other words, what it means to be me is to exist, then I have to get my existence from something else, right? So eventually, you can't just keep saying that forever, even if everything in the universe was created right now, or technically, even if the universe was eternal, it still doesn't matter, because the universe would need, everything in the universe would need some thing holding it, because it is itself not existence. And that's why God is, there is no existence and essence part of God. The simplicity matters, because his essence is existence. That makes, like, my humanity is my whatness, my Eric is my who-ness. God doesn't have a who-ness and a whatness. That's why when Adam or Moses was saying, "What's your who-ness? Give me your name." I am. There is no who-ness in the sense that you're asking me. You're asking me to limit myself with a name. No, I am existence. It's all sorts of wrapped together in this really powerful. Like, that God is worth singing about on Sunday, not this super guy in the sky that we sometimes diminish him to be. So, omniscience, omniscience, the world's largest final exam, omniscience. God is pure act with no potentiality. Potentiality is a limitation. Hence, God has no limitations in his being. But God's knowledge is his being, because he doesn't have parts, knowledge and power and all that. So if his knowledge is identical to his being, and he has no limitations in his being, his knowledge has no limitations. Nothing we say about God has limitations, including his knowledge. Again, just to take away the big guy in the sky, divine personalism, it doesn't mean the same thing as our knowledge, but God's just really, 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 really smart. That's not what we're saying. It's analogically the same thing as our knowledge. It's not univocally. It's not the exact same thing. Otherwise, we're worshiping a really big created being. And that's more in line with like Greek mythology, those type of gods, or our modern superhero stories. I mean, that's honestly what they are, Superman versus Yahweh. So science means know, or body of knowledge, and omni is all. So God's knowledge is the same thing as his essence. It's the same as, interestingly, they're all the same. They follow from his pure actuality and simplicity. God knows all things because he knows himself. These aren't propositions that he's observing in reality and then coming to discourse in his head and then comes to a true belief about it. When people talk about God in that way, they're anthropomorphizing. They're talking about God the way we know things. He knows all things because he knows himself, and his essence is his knowledge. Same thing as because he's simple. So he knows all things more perfect than creatures do. God's knowledge is not discursive. That's why I just say he doesn't like think through and come to a conclusion. He's not a logical person in that sense, like, you know, the conclusion to an argument. God knows all things actual and possible, and future contingents, meaning if this, then that. Like, if I step out on the street, I'll get hit by a car. God knows that, but not because he sat there and did if-then reasoning. It's in his very essence. Now, some what do you call it, practical applications of this. So you commit a really big sin, and we're all old enough that we've all probably been there where we're like just really disappointing ourselves. Then think back to the day that you accepted Christ and how that felt in those weeks and months following. Did God get to that day of that big sin and like, oh man, I didn't see that coming. I probably wouldn't have died for you if I knew that. So meditating on his omniscience, think about the practical when you're confessing and asking for forgiveness and receiving that grace. It's like, Lord, I'm horrified at what I just did. And you knew that when you came into my heart. Why? Why would you do that? Oh, because you're all loving. You're holy. You see how this all starts to work together into actual Christian living? This is not just academic stuff to know about God. This is, you can't worship God or love God or be in a relationship with him if you don't know anything about him. And that's just one of the major things that I took from God knows everything. He's not up there rooting for anything. He knows it. It's innate in his being. So that is pretty cool. So the biblical basis for God's omniscience. His understanding is infinite. Great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit. A lot of these are the ones that we sing a lot of songs centered around these passages, so you'll recognize. In Job, be assured that my words are not false. One perfect in knowledge is with you. That was the part of Job in chapter 36 and 37 where God goes off on him. Really, every few years, it's good to just read that and kind of remember, okay, you are all-powerful, all-knowing. I make known the end from the beginning, from the ancient of times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. It's not willy-nilly all that I please, because he won't do anything that's contrary to his nature, because he can't act or be anything other than anything that violates his nature, which is love, faithfulness, right? He's all these things that we say about him. Omniscience, this is one of the objections that we'll deal with. Omniscience eliminates freedom. God knows it ahead of time, and he can't be mistaken, because God doesn't have any false beliefs, right? I'm using anthropomorphism there too. But if he knows it ahead of time, then he lives in the eternal now. How can an act be both free and determined? Does that make sense? The problem that is raised, this is called usually logical determinism. The Greeks have this problem. Anybody that believes in a God or gods that are all-knowing would have to wrestle with this. So this is what Christian theism has to wrestle with. If God knows the future infallibly, can't be wrong about it, then what can you do that would contradict what he already knows? See the problem that they're trying to present? And this again gets back to the predestination and free will debate. God predestined you because he foreknew you. So did you have any choice in that? That decision to accept Jesus? So you get in the... It's okay to wrestle with these things. And that's why, Calvinists and non-Calvinists, or however you want to label them, but predestination, free will, or any middle ground you think is there, we need to wrestle with this. We don't want to at all diminish God's sovereignty or his omnipotence or his omniscience. He has all these things. We know they're analogically true of him. But we also know the Bible's very clear that we're free. And we're accountable because of our freedom. We could have done this or done that. So how do we bring these two together is something that I think everybody has to wrestle with. But you can't do freedom to the degree that God's up there going, golly gee, I wish I could bring my will about in time and space, but I can't. That's not God. But on the other end, you can't have a puppet master holding the puppets accountable for the movements they're making, because they're not free. And that violates him in his essence. That's a contradiction in his essence. It breaks the law of logic, one of the laws of logic. So God can know for sure what we will freely do is the simplest way to say it. There's a book called Chosen But Free and a whole bunch of other things written on it. If you want to get deeper into it, one of Norm Geisler's books, Chosen But Free. God can't know what we are forced to freely do because it's a contradiction. So if you're forced to freely do something, well, you can't be, because it wouldn't be free then. It's the puppet analogy. So therefore, since it's a contradiction, you can't forcibly freely do something. God doesn't know anything that is forcibly, so he doesn't have any knowledge of things that he determined ahead of time and held you accountable for. In other words, all of your actions are free. And God knows it in his being. From all eternity, he's known it. And so in that sense, we're pre-chosen, predestined, he foreknew, those types of words. You look at Romans 9 and some, I think it's Ephesians that has some strong language on predestination. It's not talking about puppetry, that God dictates the actions of people. It's just that foreknowledge. Does that satisfy it a little bit? This is a big one. It's hard. It's not easy for any of us.
Reverend Kurt, the way he describes it is, he's a graduate.
Kurt Wise, yep.
That's it. And the way he described it to me was that, okay, if you look back before time began, God, knowing the rotten decisions that you were going to make, created creation in the sense knowing that it would end up there anyway, knowing that you would make those mistakes and that you would make the good choices, but he decided to go ahead and create at that point anyway.
Right.
Despite that. So that's how there's that was the point of foreknowledge and predestination.
And God can factor in all of the free choices,
Yeah.
even bad ones. So, for example, he can factor in that Muslims were going to try and slaughter Jews and Christians and have all those horrible things, and they were going to be following this book and this prophet and his followers doing these bad things. But what did he do? He used them to preserve this body of knowledge called Aristotelianism and eventually deliver it back to the church. I don't know, I don't remember if it was because of a battle and they found some books and they translated them, or I don't think it was given as a gift. But God used someone's bad choices, the whole religion's bad choices, to bring about a very, very strong good in our understanding of Him and reality, by reintroducing us to those thoughts and then baptizing them with Christian theism. It's like, wow, this fits together perfectly. So that's just one example amongst many. Does it mean that all those things that that those Muslims were doing were good? They're still bad choices, evil, sin that God's going to hold them accountable for, but He used it because He's God. He can factor that in. And you multiply that by near infinite number of little choices that each of us make. He knows. He even knows little things. You remember this the little quick analogy that He uses in Jurassic Park when he's talking about chaos theory, and they're in the helicopter going up. He's trying to describe it real quickly. He says basically a butterfly flapping its wings in Tokyo, I think it is, causes a tsunami in North America or something. And she's like, what? He says, it's just, the point is that things that look really small and insignificant can have a compounding effect that, together with a bunch of other compounding effects, produce things that we would consider real large, like a tsunami or a hurricane. And everything interacts with everything else, even non-free creatures like animals and the plate tectonics and everything. That's how awesome God's omniscience is. He factors every single thing in to bringing about His will, so that there is not one person who desperately would want to accept Christ, but God keeps them from knowing Christ, for example. Or, God always, what's the Bible say? Don't say God made you do it. Because when you're tempted, God gave you a way out. It's because of your own sinful desires that you sin. Don't say the Lord tempted me, because God doesn't tempt. It's kind of saying the same thing, that there's always the possibility for us to do the right thing. We're not puppets in any sense of the word. So it's all sorts of coalesce together.
Can I just ask something?
Yeah.
Do you, and this is sort of a weird question, but so I think this is something, that's why God's God. We're not going to figure this one out, my opinion.
No.
Now, you might
I can figure any of it out fully.
Well,
Until
but
heaven.
this really, but do you think this is something that we would maybe, just what you think, maybe in heaven? Or do you think God's always going to have these things above us that?
No. We will have what we call the beatific vision, which is what 1 Corinthians 13 is talking about. We will see perfectly. That's one of the passages. The beatific vision just means we'll see God for who He is. Right now we see a shadow, we see His effects, and that's the only way we can reason from effect to cause. But when we see God for who He is face to face, we won't be God. We won't know experientially what it means to be infinite, because we'll still be finite. because we had a beginning, but we're living in eternity. So it doesn't mean that we're God at all, but we see him for who he is. Now the question is, will we care? I don't know. Like, so yes, we will know exactly how free will and predestination worked out, but will we care anymore? Like, I knew it. Yeah, I was totally right about that. Or man, I was way off on that one. That is, I don't know. Like, I hope we will care, honestly, because I want to have some satisfaction of in heaven to be able to talk with each other and be like, man, remember that time? Yeah, I remember that time. I'm sorry, and both of us were off on some part, and it's a time of not regret, but just fulfillment in our human relationships as well as perfect fulfillment in all of our relationships, but first and foremost with God. So, yes, we will know the answer to it, but I don't know that we'll care. And yeah, that's the best way to say it. I hope we'll care, but it doesn't matter. It's going to be awesome. That we know for sure.
Yeah, that's the whole point of it all anyway. Vision.
Which
That's
is interesting.
the
Not
whole-
even Adam and Eve had that. They still only saw God with perfect human reasoning and uses of their senses. They reasoned from effect to cause perfectly, but they still didn't know God in his essence, like we all will when we're before them. They know him now. I assume Adam and Eve are in heaven. Actually, that's a good question. I think they would be, right? That's a really good question. Because we all
Yeah,
think
yeah.
Abraham was in heaven, of course, and Moses, of course, was in heaven. We know that because he appeared to Jesus. Adam and Eve. Wow.
That'd be like God's character for him for Adam and Eve to be in heaven.
I would think.
Yeah,
It just seems like
that's
it's
the
sort of
ultimate-
assumed.
Yeah, but that's
But-
the ultimate display of his mercy and stuff, and that the one who brought sin
Yeah.
into the human race.
I'm going to ask our professors that. Like,
Is,
who's written on that
is
before? Because
forgiven.
someone must have asked that question. Because we all ask about the saints before Jesus, and so we know Moses and Elijah attended to Jesus, so we know that they're in heaven. Whatever that means for an Old Testament person. Abraham longed to see, looked forward to my day. Jesus said, and he knew me in that sense. Sounds like he's set. Everybody in the Hall of Faith, and
I was gonna say, is your name in there?
yeah,
Yeah.
if you're one of those people, including Rahab the prostitute,
Yeah,
I think she's in heaven. I mean,
yeah.
why would the writer of Hebrews go on about that?
Yeah.
So, that's a really good question.
Can you imagine their general revelation?
Adam
and Eve.
Up there, you mean? Or yeah, Adam and Eve. Yeah.
yeah.
That's what I mean. They knew everything that can be known about God through general revelation and through him talking to them too. I mean, they had perfect communication with him. There was nothing that they lacked in this created state.
Be hard to miss.
What's cool though is that God, when we are disembodied for the time being, we have a beatific vision, and then to make us complete humans again, he gives us resurrection bodies. He talks quite a bit in the Bible about the fact that we're going to have resurrection bodies like Jesus. Paul even says if there's no resurrection, that really stinks. Like that's we're kind of what does he say? If there's no resurrection, we are to be pitied. I think is how he puts it. Yeah, and it's a pretty big deal. It's doctrinally in the Bible, and we often forget about it because we're so focused on the fact that we immediately are with Jesus and God as soon as we die. As soon as we die here, we're immediately with God, and that's true. But we forget that part of Revelation where we get our bodies back with the beatific vision. Now that's going to be awesome. To have all the benefits of general and special in a sense, or just physical existence and perfect human existence with God. It's going to be really raise the roof kind of fun there. All right. Lastly, he's got 3 slides. Omniscience eliminates. Did I already say all this?
Yes.
Yes. And there's no more questions about sovereignty and free will. We got it all figured out, right? Only 2 more. A little follow-up to that. Okay. Determinism and freedom. God knows all things. Whatever God knows is determined to come to pass. God knew Judas would betray Christ. Therefore, Judas had to betray Christ. That's their logical argument. Judas was not free. The problem there is the Bible holds him accountable, right? He was like in the Gospels even when they would foreshadow, he said this because he was going to be true. He was a bad guy, and they said it from the beginning. Jesus chose him knowing he was going to betray him. They don't say, well, he didn't have a choice. God used it. God forced him to do it because he had to fulfill a prophecy. Why did he have to prophesy that he would be betrayed in the first place? Because it's not prophesied that and not doing Judas to that. You ever think about that? The only reason that he had to do it, or the only reason Jesus had to be born in Bethlehem is because it was prophesied. God didn't have to prophesy those things. Those aren't necessarily following from his being. Arbitrary things like where he's born and whether there were wise men or all the things that are surrounding the birth story. Think about that. So saying that Judas had to fulfill prophecy doesn't answer the question. Why not just not prophesy it, God? If Judas could have chosen, but you're saying as a determinist that he had no choice in the matter, but God holds him accountable. You can't have both. Omniscience leads to fatalism. Now, fatalism is the sort of emotional conclusion of determinism. Determinism is the word we use for the logical structure, and it's not just a Christian thing. The Greeks were determinists. It just means what's going to happen is going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. It's logically determined. Fatalism is sort of our emotional response to determinism. Like, well, forget it then. Whatever. Why even get up in the morning? Why try? Why witness to people if it doesn't matter? Because God commanded us to. So I'm elect, or I'm not. Doesn't matter. I can't. Nothing I can do. Nothing they can do about it. So what are we doing out there sharing our faith? And this is why I say that not all Calvinists are the same on this, because one of the greatest evangelistic training systems is the evangelism explosion by a Presbyterian Calvinist pastor, D. James Kennedy. And so obviously, there's nothing necessarily about Calvinism that makes you a fatalist or a determinist, because he could never do what he taught people to do if he believed in true fatalism and determinism. So I don't want to lump all people into one category. Did I skip a slide or did it? Oh yeah, we just did that other one was just a picture. Okay, so it does matter what I do since I am free. So sharing your faith or not sharing your faith, it does matter. Just because it is determined does not mean that it isn't free. We already talked about that. Further, we usually do not know what God has determined before we choose it. Finally, if we freely choose it, then it is what God, quote, foreknew would happen. So we are free to choose it. There's a lot more to say about that, because then, does that mean God is responding to our free choice? In which case, he's being moved in his knowledge by our actions. His knowledge differs based on our actions, in a sense. So that's one of the objections. No, not that this class isn't for that. That's a huge, awesome set of things to talk about. Not messing with God's characteristics, God's metaphysical attributes, when you're talking about predestination versus free will. That's the whole class can be done on that. And it is. There's actually a class at our seminary on this one topic. So, yeah, we finished early.
Well, I was just thinking, are we over?
Yeah, well, when that's done, if there is any question and discussion, because
Yeah.
that's what the slide says. So we can question and discuss.
Have you heard Dr. Richard Howell's lecture at the AMP 2019 conference?
I was physically there. I was the one that recorded it. That shaky camera movement?
Yeah, I was going to say,
that's the best I could do.
But that's a good one to follow up on what we've just discussed
Yep.
here.
You want to share with them a little bit about it? 'Cause
Well,
is it really, his talk was, what about those who have never heard? So it's a really great question to ponder. And I use the analogy of the playground. What lines can we not cross? And one of them would be, for example, universalism. Everyone's going to get saved no matter what. That's obviously something that's not open to somebody who believes the words of the Bible, because there are a whole lot of descriptions of people who are suffering in hell and will be suffering in hell. So clearly that's not the case. Everybody's in heaven. Another one is annihilationism. You ever hear that author Rob Bell, pastor up in Michigan?
oh yeah.
Unfortunately. You've heard his name.
Yeah, he's not any, is he?
I'm not sure where he stands now. I heard some.
I mean, he's
rumors.
not the pastor at the church.
No, he moved on. I think it's one of those where I got so big selling books, I don't need to be a pastor anymore, kind of thing. And honestly, I do think he's probably on the road that so many of them go on, where you may not even be a theist in years from now, because of the trajectory I see him going on. It's like, oh man, don't. He was basically saying that it's sort of a universalism, an annihilationism. God will annihilate anyone instead of sending them to hell. So that's too cruel for God. It's against his nature. But everyone who accepts Jesus will go to heaven. So we still get, yay, we get to be in heaven with him. And, that part of it's still true. But there's a lot written in the Bible about the eternal suffering of the damned. So if you're going to accept the Bible for the heaven, you got to accept it for the hell, unfortunately. You've always heard probably that Jesus taught more in hell than he did in heaven. As far as numerically, that's true. Number of times you spoke. So that's what this talk was on, and you can. Didn't I post it to the group, or did I just? If you go to SES's Facebook page, it's only a 30-minute talk. That's what AMP does, is 30-minute talks, and then there's Q&A afterwards, which I didn't record because I had other scholars up there. I didn't know if I had permission. I got permission to do this though. So, anything else? We're still early.
It's kind of a rabbit hole. A weird question.
That's all we do here, our rabbit trails. And
All right. Garden of Eden. Was what gave them the knowledge of good and evil, was it actually the fruit, or was it the act of taking the fruit, the act of disobedience?
And paired with that,
That
did the fruit of the tree of life keep them alive artificially, so to speak? Like, what if they had stopped eating from that tree, but never sinned? Would they die? That's kind of the same type of question. Is there something in the fruits that did it, or is it just sort of arbitrary? That God said, you keep doing that, I'm going to keep you alive, and if you do that, I'm going to take away the immortality. By the way, to be human is to die. Man had an artificial grace. It's called, not called artificial grace, there's some big word for it, but there's a special grace that God gives humans in the garden, and would have given us if we had never sinned, to make us immortal. But the reason they say that modern days is because look at the laws of physics by which we live, digestion and things like that. Those same laws of physics mean decay. So there's an artificiality of God, it's like a constant miracle. Now, they wouldn't have died. Nobody would have died if there was no sin, the original sin. But the question is, did God do something radically different in our natures, our physical and immaterial natures, at the curse? We don't think so, because that means that Adam pre-fall and post-fall would actually be, if you have a new nature, you're a different thing. So human nature and dog nature are different. That's what makes us human and them dogs. So if Adam pre-fall and Adam post-fall have different natures, that's two different species. That doesn't flow, right? And in addition to that, nature is what gets passed on. So in addition to that, Jesus dying, the reason his death applies to all humans is because he has human nature. That's why God had to take on human nature in order to pay for the penalty of all humans in our nature. So if Adam was something different after the fall, that same argument would mean Jesus is something different. He doesn't share this one thing called human nature. So back to the essence existence, my whatness is human, that's my nature. My who-ness is Eric, I'm this human. So the difference between those two. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like it on the surface it's that powerful, but it's real powerful. Now, on that tree of death, the tree of knowledge, because of, I think that the tree of life was God giving a special grace to keep people alive as they continually obeyed that one command he had them obey, then the same thing was true. It's not something physiological that changed because of the fruit, also because that would have changed the nature. God had to remove something, which was that special grace That also jives with, on that day you will die. And on that day, death began because that was the day he removed that special grace and said, okay, I'm going to let your nature play its way out instead of me artificially keeping you alive. Not artificial, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean.
Preserve.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like God can never fail to give them that life, right? He's not going to forget one day, I forgot to artificially keep
He's
them
kind of
alive.
taking the hand away just a little bit.
Not in existence, though.
Yeah, not in
No,
existence,
it's taking away. It's an act of God that changed. He can't change in his nature, so we wouldn't say any metaphysical attribute changed, but an act of God, which is a mercy, I guess you could say, that changed. But that's just how he interacts with us. Nothing in him changed.
Keeping us in that state, and
We're still in the state of existence, and we still have human nature.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about in a state of free from illness or anything like that, or anything.
Yeah, I just would be careful about using the eraser analogy because that's meant to be a metaphor or a simile or an analogy of existence. Like that's the profundity of that. We're talking about the Garden of Eden. Yeah, but it would work if you're, as long as someone didn't confuse the two, because it's not a different nature, it's not a diminished existence, because you either exist or don't. There's no in between, partial existence. So God is holding you in existence.
He's holding the button down for keeping that keeps us in perfect and good in perfect health.
Yep. And I do think that our relationship with the created order changed. Obviously, our Dr. Land likes to say that what that is, the human nature that was perfect, is not erased at the fall, because again, then you wouldn't be human still. It was diminished or effaced, not erased. So majorly messed up. That's sin, physical consequences like our backs and whatever. But
now
also
you're into Calvinism again.
The what?
Now you're getting into Calvinism again.
Right. I mean, all this stuff is right there.
The face not erased.
Right. Well, it's that's why that part of Calvinism, historic Calvinism, I would agree with. Presuppositional Calvinism is completely dangerous and wrong, because they're saying that it's basically erased. There is no ability for a lost person to even understand the concept of God, things of God, even that they're a sinner and that there's this opportunity called salvation. They can't even understand it in presuppositionalism. So therefore, there's no hope for them unless God comes in and makes them understand it, saves them, but they're saved then. So they're understanding something that happened instead of a proposition in front of them. See how messed up that is? It's in fact, who was it? Some anti-Calvinists called it divine rape, to be really blunt. I can't remember who it was, some famous thinker. And I mean, it's what do you call it?
It's the same guy who preached the sermon,
Sinners in the hand of an angry God. Yeah.
What's his name?
I can't remember. Yeah.
That's
the guy. Yeah. You know, he died before he did his follow-up sermon. He meant to have a two-parter: sinners in the hand of an angry God, and the second one was something about saints in the hand of
Jonathan.
Yeah.
Was it John Edwards that did that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he died before he could write the grace side of it, which was, we're saints or saved in the hands of a loving God. It was playing the same words. Interesting, God didn't let him finish.
If you read too much of him, you will definitely doubt your salvation.
Yeah, he believes you can lose it.
You will definitely doubt your salvation if you read a lot.
Thing is, though, determinists have that same existential crisis because, am I elect or maybe I was wrong when I thought I was elect. Now I'm living a life that doesn't seem the lifestyle of an elect, so maybe I was just misleading myself. They know God will never let go of an elect person. And we as Baptists believe in eternal security for the same reason. God does not renege on his decisions. And his decision is to offer salvation to everyone, and those who receive it, to them he gives eternal life. That's a direct quote from the Bible. The reason why I'm not a determinist. As many as receive it, he gives them the right to be children of God. That's a done deal. Jonathan Edwards said you can sin away your salvation, or you can have it and then lose it. And so that person's insecure because of that lose it yesterday or not? It's the same type of a question as, did I ever have it in the first place or not? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's,
It, actually said that God would deceive hypocrites into believing they were saved.
that's why I think you have to just trust the words of God. This is special revelation stuff here. He said it, and I know this is His word through all these other things we've talked about. I know this is His word, and He says that clearly. I'm just going to have to hold on to that. And yeah, read Romans 7 and say that you can sin your salvation away. Romans 7 is I can't stand in my sin, and then Romans 8 is like, because of what I just said, there is therefore no condemnation. So that, and then read Galatians. I mean, man, you can't read Paul and be a person who thinks you can lose your salvation. You can read James maybe and misunderstand it. In some of Acts, yeah. Not when Paul's being Paul. So, but Acts is a historical book, so it's a little harder to say that we know exactly what the full thought of, you know.
Well, and if that's what it's saying in Acts, then you can't get it back if you lose it, so.
Well, you might, and also the Hebrews passages.
Oh, Hebrews, that's what I'm thinking of.
Hebrews is the one
Hebrews.
that, like, yeah, exactly. If you think you can lose it, and that's the passage, you're done. There's no, it's very clear about that, if that's what it means, and I don't think it is. Barry Leventhal did that, and we took that class on salvation, and he explained it all, and I was like, okay, that makes sense.
I hope it's
And I
not,
remember it.
because if it's true, then I've lost it, and I'm good. There's nothing I can do.
There's nothing to do.
back.
And of course, the main thing is, since the Holy Spirit is what convicts us, if you're feeling convicted about sin, then you didn't sin away your salvation, because you still have it to feel convicted. So the lost don't even feel, the wicked don't even feel ashamed. You know, they do things in broad daylight that ought to be, I think it's James that even says that. They ought to be really embarrassed by that, but they're not. So the fact that anyone is feeling conviction, okay, good. I know that. I know I wouldn't be able to feel conviction if it weren't for the Holy Spirit. So, yeah, we have to live overcoming lives. And as Christians, if we're constantly walking around like, I don't know if God's going to squash me like a bug today. You know, that's and then in Catholic theology, they add an additional layer of messed upness, that the church is what delivers the grace, right? They get it from God and they dole it out literally at Eucharist, but also with all the other sacraments, and they can decide whether or not, no, you've crossed the line, buddy. Sorry. They take back the only means of grace anybody has, which means they're going to hell now, or purgatory.
Makes them pretty powerful.
It's very convenient, isn't it?
Well, that's why so many priests
money.
were upset whenever that one priest gave Nancy Pelosi communion, because in essence, that's what he was doing.
But of course, he would say, hey, she's not going to heaven because of this one communion, because tomorrow we can change our mind. I mean, it's a daily thing with Catholics. That's why, before the Reformation, and again, we're done, this is overtime now. In the Reformation, it was really hard for people who had been Catholic all that time to not feel like they had to go to church.